Motivated business owner, welcome to the Small Business Big Marketing Spotlight. I'm your host, Timbo Reid, and today's bright spark is JD Barker, an international best-selling author of suspense titles including The Fourth Monkey and Behind a Closed Door. He also hosts the Writers Inc. podcast, a fellow podcaster, I love that, and is frustrated by the state of the publishing industry in 2024. Today, we'll be flicking the switch on a number of things, including how JD got his start in publishing and what role Stephen King played in that. Why the current publishing model is broken and what JD is doing to fix it. JD will share his approach to writing and creativity, and we'll discuss his latest deal with Simon & Schuster. JD, welcome to the Spotlight.
Hey man, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm looking forward to speaking to an author, which I haven't done for a very long time, and an accomplished one at that. Let's start with the big question, JD. How important is the cover to the success of a book?
Oh man, it's funny because when I indie published my very first title, and I'm a big believer in crowdsourcing. So I went to, there's a website called 99 Designs, and you pay, it's like $300 or $400 US, and they'll give you like 50 to 60 different design ideas, which I love because, a lot of times they'll come up with something way more creative than I would ever come up with on my own. But then I took those and I put them on social media with one question. If you were to walk into a bookstore and had to buy a book based solely on its cover, which one would you pick? And then that's the cover that the winner is the one that I slapped on the book. In the traditional publishing world, it doesn't work that way. So your editor basically talks to the people, in the marketing department, the cover designers, explains what the book is about, gives them a couple comp titles. They decide, well, these colors are hot, these fonts are hot, and they put something together. But it's all done by people who haven't actually read the book. It's just based on information, secondhand info. And then they show you the cover, and, every one of my contracts says I've got the right to veto that cover if I don't like it. But what I learned early on is if you veto it as an author and the book tanks, they're going to say, well, if we would have went with the cover we wanted instead of, you vetoing it and making us use something else, it probably would have done well. So I quit, weighing in on covers long time ago. And once you start getting published in different countries, like literally every country's got its own cover too.
What a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
What a rabbit hole.
Yeah, and at some point you have to leave it up to the publishers. They know what sells in their particular market. You've got to go with their advice.
Leave it to the experts. Now, JD, you were a chief compliance officer for a brokerage firm. Tell us about the moment you thought, you know what, I'm going to become an author.
I hated that job. I really did. But
I do love a good I do love a good career transition.
This was definitely a switch. So I've been writing my entire life, but when I was in college, my parents told me you can't make a living as a writer. You have to get a real job. So I've got degrees in finance and business and information technology, and I got halfway through a psychology degree. So I've got paper hanging on the walls. Now I literally get paid to make shit up. So it's gone completely different direction. But I went into the corporate world. I went into finance, and I just kind of worked my way up the ladder. And my last real job, I was chief compliance officer at a brokerage firm, which is it's basically like being responsible for lost luggage at the airport. Nobody wants to talk to you, but they're glad you're there when they have to.
It does put you, that title does put you in the C-suite, so it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I had a nice office, and it paid extremely well, and that was part of the problem because I hated the job, but it paid really good. And my wife and I, we had the trappings of that lifestyle. We had a big house, we had cars, we had a boat. So our monthly nut just to pay for all this stuff was around $12,000, so we couldn't just walk away. But I hated the job. I would come home at night and I would write to basically stay sane. And I got into what's called working as a book doctor or a ghostwriter. So I would basically get manuscripts from editors or from agents that were really close to being publishable, but they needed some work. And they would bring me in as a hired gun to basically fine tune the manuscript. They would tell me exactly what was wrong, what was working, what wasn't, and then I would, go to it. It wasn't a personal thing for me. Like if they told the author to do some of these changes, a lot of times they got pushback. For me, it was just a paycheck. But I quickly learned what they were looking for, what they wanted to see in order to get a solid publishable book that would sell well.
What a fantastic grounding for a fellow who's about to become a professional full-time author. Tell us about getting that first book to market, JD. Was it scary? No, I'm sure the book itself was scary, but the actual process of getting it to market, was that daunting coming out of corporate life?
Not really, because I had managed a lot of projects, and to me, that's all this
course.
was. It was a product that was going out there, and I just needed to make sure that it was marketed and presented properly. So I looked at the big publishers. I indie published the book, but I basically followed their model. So I hired all the proper editors, the cover designers. We put the book out in hardcover and paperback, audiobook. Basically, did everything that you would see coming out of somebody like Penguin or Random House, but did it as an independent publisher.
How fantastic! So you had a step up, and you sort of had some rails to follow, given what you were doing. Your first book, correct me if I'm wrong, Stephen King had some kind of involvement. Is that correct?
He did, yeah. So in the book, I had to explain where the wife buys a journal. And just to get the last page down on paper, I wrote that she walked into Needful Things, Stephen King's store, and bought it there, and fully expected to have to change that because you can't do that sort of thing without lawyers, pounding on your door. But my wife read it, and she's like, let's see if we can get King's permission to use that. And long story short, we did. Initially, I printed up the manuscript, hopped in the car, and we almost went to King's house, which didn't quite work out. But I reached out to a friend of mine who knew him, told him what I was trying to do. He said, well, here's Steve's email address. Send him the book. If he likes it, you'll hear back from him. If the book is crap, he probably won't respond, but leave the guy alone. And King emailed me back a couple days later and said, I love this. Go ahead and use it. Let me know if you need anything. And so I ended up using some references from Needful Things in that book. That's honestly, it's what helped really launch my career. The fact that he was willing to do that. Publishers Weekly wrote an expose about basically my failed attempt to go to his house. And when librarians and bookstore owners read that, I guess they got a little laugh out of it. And they said, well, I'll stock that book. And they started picking it up. And before I knew it, we sold 250,000 copies.
No, of your first book.
Of the first book, yeah.
Clearly a very good book, but it doesn't hurt to attach a name like Stephen King to the story. What a fantastic marketing ploy.
Yeah,
Genius.
It's one of the, you need a perfect storm for a bestseller, right? Like you can write the best book in the world, but if nobody knows about it, it's going to dwindle and die on the shelf. So a lot of different things have to come together, and I got really lucky with that one.
Well, that was sort of, as much as my opening question about covers was, a bit of a ha-ha. There's an aha in a ha-ha. And the reality is there would be many, many, many books out there that are just brilliant, but no one ever gets to see them. Maybe because of the cover, maybe because of the promote. Be like a podcast, mate. Sometimes, there's some good podcasts out there.
I've read some horrible books that had incredibly good covers, and vice versa. I've read some,
I agree.
Seen some terrible covers with really good books underneath. So don't judge a book by its cover. That came from somewhere.
Absolutely. I do want to talk about your view on the publishing industry model. But before we do that, JD, obviously that Stephen King incident, as small as it was, had a big impact on your first book. But you are also now, from what I understand, taking on co-authors to teach what to give them a leg up. Probably inspired slightly maybe by what Stephen did, and now it's your opportunity to give back.
Yeah, well, I've always taught other authors. I've learned a lot in this industry, and I kind of recharge my batteries to be able to sit down with somebody that it really wants to learn this industry, and help them fine tune their own work. So I've kind of twisted that a little bit. I've written 5 books now with James Patterson, and he's taught me a ton on the business side. A lot of experience on the writing side too, but on the business end, and it really inspired me. So rather than just teaching some of these authors, I'm basically taking them and helping them through the entire writing process. Coming up with the book idea, writing the book with them, and then getting it out on shelves, and basically seeing them through from start to finish. And it gives them a new, set of tools for their toolbox so that they can take to the next book. And it gives me a title that I can put out there with my name on it, which helps me stay in front of my audience.
Do you know what I love about that, JD, is that authors, by nature, creative souls, and that's their main focus and their main purpose in life is to be creative. And so often, and like a tradesperson, a plumber or an electrician, they're taught the skills, but they're not taught the business skills. And your last comment about helping co-authors about and helping them get their book on the shelf. That's so important, because it's all right to be able to be a great writer.
It is, with it. Yeah, I mean, you can sit. I'll meet somebody or read something that they wrote, and you see a lot of the same mistakes over and over again. And I've made plenty, and I stumbled through them, and I kind of figured my way out the other side. But there's no reason for somebody else to have to stumble through those same events again. If I can teach them, how to get past it and help them move on, I'm all for it.
This co-author assistance, JD, what's it look like? Is it a workshop? Is it how do people access that?
So I basically find them, for the most part, through other books that they've written. A lot of authors, I'll find a book on Amazon that's just not selling well, but I'll dig into the actual text, and for whatever reason, I can tell if like somebody's got that what I call the writer gene. I can tell whether they can tell a story or not, and if I see something that's fixable in their writing, then I'll reach out to them. I basically take them through the entire process from start to finish. So we come up with the idea for the book, what the book is going to be about. I force them to write what I call the backup book blurb. So the 200 words you would normally see like on the back of a paperback describing what it's about. I force them to create a tagline, which is extremely difficult to do, to write basically one sentence describing what that book is going to be about. It's essentially what would be on the movie poster if it was a film. And then
I love that.
Then we come up with the title, and then we go through the outlining process from start to finish, and then I work with them on actually writing the draft. Then I work with them on the editing process. So I basically take them through every step A through Z until that book is sitting there on the shelves.
That's so interesting, JD. I interviewed Colin Breyer a number of years ago. He is Jeff Bezos's shadow. That's his title. And he'd written a book called Working Backwards, which was Amazon's philosophy on generating ideas. And they always start with the press release as if the product was launched. And like you sound as though you start with that back cover blurb, because if you can nail that, then...
I think it's important. I take the tagline. It's on my monitor as I write a book. So that one sentence describing the book, it's right in front of me as I'm writing the entire time, and it keeps me in the story. Because it's easy to go off into the weeds. When you're writing a novel.
Oh yeah. I do it all the time, JD.
Yeah.
If you're finding this chat with New York Times bestselling author JD Barker illuminating, and I absolutely am, then subscribe to the Small Business Big Marketing Spotlight on your favourite podcast app. Now, JD, you say, we've talked glowingly about this wonderful industry of publishing and being an author, but you say the traditional publishing model is broken and that there is a better way, and you are leading some kind of charge to that way. Can you explain?
Yeah, I'm aggravating a lot of people in the publishing world lately.
Come on, JD.
Yeah, so well, with the first book, I indie published it, so I got a taste of that. And one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that the economics are much better as an indie author. You make about 70 cents on the dollar. If you sign with somebody like Penguin Random House, it's fantastic. They give you a big advance check. They get your book out there, but you have to pay that advance back, and usually it's for pennies on the dollar. You're lucky if you're getting 10 or 20 cents on the dollar. So you have to pay back that advance, and then on the back end, you're earning less. So that's already broken in a lot of ways. I encourage people, if you're an author and somebody throws a big advance check in front of you, if it's going to be life-changing money, by all means, take it. Change your life. But you have to weigh that versus what you're actually losing. So I indie published the first title. My second book, I ended up with a 7-figure deal, which went to basically HarperCollins. Now it was originally HMH, but they got bought out. My next couple books were published along similar lines. I film and TV stuff attached to them. I'm doing extremely well. But then I realized that I could take some of these rights and keep them for myself. So I ended up creating my own publishing company, and I published in North America on my own through my own press. And then my agent still sells all the foreign rights. So it's been kind of what I call a hybrid approach to it. And that's worked out very well for the last couple of books. Then with my latest title, which is called Behind a Closed Door, I gave it to my agent. He took it out. We started getting offers coming in, and we knew we were going to go to auction. An auction is basically when you've got multiple publishers that want a book, they have an auction for it. I got a phone call from a friend of mine that worked at Penguin Random House, and she said, "Listen, we're about to offer on your book. You need to turn it down." And I asked her why, and she said, "Well, we're about to lay off a bunch of people, and the editor who wants your book is one of them. So you don't want to get caught up in the middle of that." And about a week later, I got a similar phone call from somebody at HarperCollins. So I called my agent. I was like, let's just hit the pause button here. We need to think this through a little bit. I ended up reaching out to some friends at Simon & Schuster, and I ended up striking basically a new type of deal. They took my imprint on, which is Hampton Creek Press, as a print and distribution partner. So moving forward, I can publish whatever I want, whenever I want, through my own publishing company. But Simon & Schuster basically handles the printing, the distribution, the sales end of it. Basically, so I'm getting the best of both worlds. I'm acting as an independent publisher,
sure are.
But with somebody like Simon & Schuster as the backbone.
And good on Simon & Schuster for enabling this, because to me, and good on you too for doing it, it sounds like you're cherry picking. You're cherry picking the best parts of self-publishing. You're cherry picking the best parts of the normal publishing model and taking them out. And I think, why not? Because It's an industry. Look, I don't know a lot about it. I've got one book, a marketing book, but it looks like an industry ripe for disruption, and no one has quite figured out what that looks like.
Well, and to their credit, Simon and Schuster, I think, is cherry picking too. And, they just got bought out by a private equity firm. And I think that has a lot to do with it. They're approaching business, the business of publishing in a very different way. Because one of the biggest hurdles that, that they're seeing from their side as a publisher, a lot of people are starting to do really well as independent authors. So if you're selling in the seven figures as an indie author, there's really no reason for you to sign with a big publisher anymore, for the reasons that I outlined earlier. But under this model that I've created with Simon & Schuster, it does make sense. So they can take somebody who is selling really well, put them in a deal similar to this, and then everybody basically does well. And Simon & Schuster, they were the first ones to see that and to agree to something like this. But I really think you're going to see the other big publishers follow suit. I think they're all going to have to start doing it, because I really feel like this is the next generation of publishing. It's publishing 2.0.
JD, do you find this part of you being a professional author, which is, you're sort of being an activist in a way, is it taking away from your creativity, or do you like this, I'm going to call it the business fix, or would you prefer just to be locked in your dark room and do your words every day without interruption?
I've kind of found the best of both of those too. I write first thing in the morning. So I put my butt in my seat with my cup of coffee. I don't turn the internet on until I get my words done for the day, and I write about 2,000 to 3,000 words. It takes me till about 11 in the morning. So then at 11 o'clock, then I flip the switch. Internet comes on, email starts to flood in, and then I start dealing with the marketing side of this. So I'm trying to juggle both of it. I'm bringing in employees to help, particularly now with the co-authors. I have to do that. But I get it. It recharges my batteries in a very similar way as to working with the co-authors. Writing is fun, being creative is fun, but doing something new in business, that's fun too.
I love hearing about your writing process. Do you have a particular pen or a pad, or is it all computer based? I was watching a documentary on Seinfeld only last week where he went through his entire process, which is very simple. It's a yellow legal pad and a big biro, and no internet. And again, he does his words every day. Do you have any particular instruments?
Yeah, for the most part, I'm working on a Mac. I use a program called Scrivener, but I found that if I use different methods, my voice is different. So you can't see it right now, but off to my side here is an old Royal typewriter, and every day I write a couple of sentences on a book that I'm writing on the typewriter, and it's an old detective, noir fiction type story, and I think it's because it's a typewriter, like that particular voice is coming out. If I pick up the legal pad and I write on that, I get a very different voice. So I try to mix it up. I write 2 to 3 books a year, so I try to keep it interesting and just change it up a little bit.
Love it. JD, revenue streams for authors these days. Again, that industry's been disrupted, although audiobooks have been around a long time. What are the revenue streams? Obviously, you've got
sales.
What else?
Yeah,
film rights, TV rights.
Yeah, you've got all of that. As an indie author, I think most indie authors tend to focus on ebooks because, you can get print books out there, but most indie authors do what's called print on demand, which means they're printing a book every time one is ordered. So they're not making a whole lot of money there. You're lucky if you make $1 or $2. Once you get a little bit bigger, you can print in bulk, which is what I was doing before the Simon & Schuster thing. I would print 5,000 books at a time and I warehouse them and then ship out that way. So then you make a little bit more. With the deal that I've got now with Simon & Schuster, my margins there have expanded tremendously. So print is now what I would consider a legit revenue source. Before it was more of an afterthought. Audiobooks for sure. That's definitely something every author should be taking part in, and it's getting cheaper. With AI stepping into the mix, you can basically record an audiobook for next to nothing. I hate the fact that narrators are getting put out of business because of that, but it's unfortunately it's one of those things. But I think authors have to look at every aspect.
AI, you had to say it. Someone had to raise it.
Hey, on my podcast, we have to drink every time we say AI. I don't know if you do that here.
Because it causes you anxiety, or because it's said so often?
A little bit of both.
Tell me, let's just touch on that because it's unavoidable. I'm glass half full kind of guy when it comes to AI generally, artificial general intelligence as well. Tell me creatively, you and I both know we can go to ChatGPT right now and give it a brief and tell it to punch out a book,
right?
And we're done.
But
I also know that doesn't replace human creativity. I think. What's your view?
Yeah, no, that I think you hit the nail on the head there. To me, working with ChatGPT or any of these, and I do mess with them because I want to stay on top of what they're capable of doing. But it's like talking to an encyclopedia because it's not capable of making a creative thought at this point. It can only regurgitate what it's been taught. And I know authors that they use ChatGPT as a sounding board. They've got an idea, they'll type it in there, and they kind of work it back and forth as if they were talking to another person. I've tried it; it doesn't work for me. Like I've been on the phone with James Patterson brainstorming book ideas. That guy is creative as hell. Like that's what I want. That's what gets me excited. Having a human on the other side, coming up with some of these ideas.
What does that conversation? I hear about AI. Let's move on because I'm getting the sweats already, and it's too early in the morning for me. Just touching on those conversations with James. Excuse my lack of knowledge, but I'm assuming James Patterson is one of the big guys.
He is actually the most down to earth person I think I've ever met in this industry.
What's the session look like when you're bouncing ideas for a book on the phone or on Zoom with James? Hey, what about this? Is this something?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that. I mean, I'll give you an example. So in Coast to Coast Murders, that's the first book that we did together. I actually convinced him to work on a book without an outline, and he's never done that before. So we went back and forth chapter by chapter. I would write a chapter. I would try to paint him into some kind of impossible corner, and he would read that. He would send me another chapter back, and not only did he get out of whatever impossible situation I put him in, he came up with something even worse for me, and he does it in insanely fast. He's told me that he's slowed down. He's in his mid-70s now, and he told me that he slowed down quite a bit from when he was younger. I can't imagine what the guy was like in his prime, because he will he'll read 20 or 30,000 words and get back to you within hours, with edits, with changes, and sometimes 10 or 20,000 words of his own. People think that he doesn't do the work, and trust me, he does the work. He is all over every one of those books that he's got coming out. He is all over them.
Wow, it's sort of a surprise, but not a surprise. I find every time you meet someone at that level of success, they do have that X factor,
Well, that's the other thing about him. As a person, he's just a genuinely nice guy. Like he's the guy you do want to have a beer with. And he came from extremely humble beginnings. His family had nothing. Everything that he's got, he built himself, and he hasn't lost touch with that. He remembers that. And he's even managed to instill those values in his son. He's just left for college, but he's well-rounded, which is very difficult to do when you raise a kid in that kind of environment. He's just a tremendous person.
JD, you've had a couple of, I wouldn't say Stephen King's been a mentor, but obviously James has been. And I think it's, I've only known you for half an hour, but there's a lot of that, what you've just described of James, I feel like there's a lot of that in you. So you're just passing it forward, mate. That's our role here as we become middle-aged men.
Yeah. Unfortunately, those years are creeping up. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that, like when King helped me out with that, I feel like I have an obligation almost to help out others. And it makes you feel good to do it. It's
no doubt.
There's no reason not to do it. I try to help out anytime I possibly can.
Well, JJ, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I wish you all the success with your coming book, Behind Closed Doors, or actually just launched.
Yeah, Behind a Closed Door. It came out about 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago?
Yep.
And I'm looking at your website. Anyone, go to jdbarker.com and have a look. It's a great website. I love your story that you've written on the About Us page about how you became, an author way back when you're in your teenage bedroom hiding under the sheets trying to escape monsters under the sheet. Sheets don't protect you from monsters, JD, just letting you know that.
Oh, I think they do.
But it is... Oh, you probably know. You're writing about it all the time. Mate, jdbarker.com is where people need to go to both look at the books and buy books. JD, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate it.
And to everyone else, the motivated business owner, thank you for getting this far. If you feel a little brighter, thanks to this episode of the Small Business Big Marketing Spotlight, then you'll find more conversations with successful entrepreneurs just like JD over at smallbusinessbigmarketing.com or on your favourite podcast app. Until next time, may you and your business shine.